She thought she knew him. Everyone did. He was the man who showed up when no one else would. The one who fixed broken faucets and drove her to school when the bus broke down. He was family. He was safety. He was supposed to be her protector. But some secrets run so deep that when they finally surface, they don't just destroy lives. They shatter everything you thought you knew about trust itself. This is the story of Jasmine Williams, a 16-year-old girl whose bright smile could light up any room, and the man she called Uncle Derek, a man whose betrayal would rock a tight-knit community to its core. Jasmine Williams had the kind of laugh that made you smile even on your worst day. At 16, she was all long limbs and wild curls, constantly sketching in the margins of her notebooks, dreaming of art school and cities beyond the small Virginia town where she'd grown up. She wasn't the loudest girl in her class, but she had quiet confidence that drew people in. Life hadn't been easy for Jasmine. Her mother, Denise, had been battling addiction for years. Her father was barely a memory, just child support checks that came sporadically. So when Jasmine was 14, she moved in with her grandmother, Rosa Williams, a woman who worked double shifts at the local diner but never complained. Rosa's house sat at the end of Maple Street, a small two-bedroom with a front porch that sagged slightly but held the weight of countless conversations. The paint was peeling, the floorboards creaked, but it was home. That's when Derek stepped in. Derek Thompson, Rosa's youngest brother, had never married, never had children of his own. At 43, he lived alone in a modest house just 4 blocks away. He worked construction during the day, his hands calloused from years of manual labor. On weekends, he volunteered at the community center, teaching kids baseball. Every Sunday, he sat in the third pew at Mount Calvary Baptist Church. To everyone who knew him, Derek Thompson was dependable. When Rosa's car broke down, Derek was there with his toolbox. When Jasmine needed help with algebra, Derek patiently worked through problems at the kitchen table. When she mentioned wanting new art supplies but Rosa couldn't afford them, Derek quietly slipped a gift card into her backpack. "That man is a blessing," Rosa would tell her friends at the diner. "I don't know what we'd do without him." Jasmine felt the same way. Derek wasn't just her great-uncle. He was the father figure she'd never had. He showed up to her school art shows, cheered at her track meets, and listened when she talked about her dreams of becoming a graphic designer. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It started small. Derek's hugs lasting a little too long. His hand resting on her shoulder when he helped with homework, his fingers sometimes brushing her neck. Comments about how grown up she was looking, how pretty she was becoming. Jasmine noticed, but she brushed it off. This was Uncle Derek. He loved her like family. The first time he kissed her, Jasmine was 15. She'd been upset about something at school, a fight with a friend, a bad grade on a test. Derek had found her crying on his back porch. He'd pulled her close, whispering that everything would be okay, that she was special. And then his lips were on hers. Jasmine froze. This wasn't right. But Derek pulled back, his eyes filled with what looked like genuine affection, and told her it was okay. That what they had was special. That some people wouldn't understand it. But that didn't make it wrong. "This is just between us," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Family business stays in the family." Jasmine wanted to tell someone. The words sat heavy in her chest, begging to be spoken. But who would she tell? Rosa was already working herself to the bone. Her friends wouldn't understand. And Derek was family. He was the one person who had never let her down. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was just love. A different kind of love. So she stayed quiet. Over the next year, the secret grew heavier. Derek's visits became more frequent, his touches more intimate. He would text her constantly, sweet messages at first, then more demanding ones. He bought her expensive gifts, a new phone, designer clothes, art supplies. But they came with conditions. Silence, secrecy, submission. If anyone found out, Derek would whisper during their meetings, "They'd take you away from Rosa. Is that what you want? To break your grandmother's heart?" Jasmine began to withdraw. Her grades slipped. She quit the track team. Her art, once vibrant and full of life, became darker, more abstract. Her best friend, Kendra, noticed the change but couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Mrs. Patterson, Jasmine's English teacher, watched as the bright, engaged student gradually became withdrawn and distracted. She pulled Jasmine aside after class one day, asking if everything was okay at home. Jasmine nodded quickly and mumbled something about being tired before hurrying away. At home, Rosa sensed the change too. Her granddaughter, once chatty and affectionate, now spent most of her time locked in her bedroom. When Derek came by for dinner, Jasmine would barely speak, pushing food around her plate and excusing herself as soon as possible. Rosa mentioned it to Derek once, worried that Jasmine might be dealing with depression. "Teenagers," Derek had said with a knowing smile. "She's just going through a phase." But the truth has a way of demanding to be heard. Jasmine started having panic attacks whenever Derek was around. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes. She began writing in a journal, pouring her confusion and pain onto pages she hid beneath her mattress. The entries were heartbreaking. "I don't know what's happening to me. Uncle Derek says he loves me, but this doesn't feel like love. It feels wrong. But he's the only one who's ever stayed. He brought me a necklace today. It's beautiful, but I don't want to wear it. I don't want anything from him anymore, but I can't tell him that. Sometimes I think about telling Grandma Rosa, but what would I even say? She loves him so much. It would destroy her. And what if she doesn't believe me?" The journal became Jasmine's lifeline, the only place where she could be completely honest. She wrote about the gifts that felt like bribes, the affection that felt like manipulation, the growing sense that she was trapped. By the time Jasmine turned 16, the secret had consumed her entire life. She'd convinced herself that what was happening was somehow her fault, that she'd given Derek the wrong signals. The shame was suffocating.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Derek, meanwhile, continued to play the role of the devoted uncle. He helped Rosa with household repairs, brought groceries when money was tight, and publicly doted on Jasmine in ways that seemed perfectly appropriate. He'd learned to read her moods, to back off when she seemed on the verge of breaking, to apply just enough pressure to maintain control. But control is fragile, and Derek was about to learn that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble. It was a warm evening in late September when everything changed. Jasmine had been quiet all week, more withdrawn than usual. She'd missed 2 days of school, claiming she was sick. Derek had been by the house every day, ostensibly to check on his favorite niece. That Friday, Derek offered to take Jasmine out for ice cream, just like he'd done countless times before. Rosa smiled and told Jasmine to have fun, grateful that Derek was making an effort to cheer her up. But as Jasmine reluctantly got into Derek's pickup truck, she felt a familiar knot of dread in her stomach. She was tired of pretending, tired of keeping secrets. That afternoon, she'd made a decision that terrified and liberated her. She was going to tell Rosa everything. Derek must have sensed her shift in mood during the drive. Instead of heading to the ice cream shop, he turned toward the lake on the outskirts of town, a secluded spot where they'd met many times before. Jasmine's heart began to race. "I don't want to go to the lake," she said quietly. "Can we just get ice cream and go home?" Derek's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. I thought we could talk first. You've been acting strange lately. I'm tired, Uncle Derek. I just want to go home. Home to do what? Hide in your room? Ignore me like you've been doing all week. Derek pulled the truck to a stop near the water's edge. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lake. To Jasmine, it felt ominous. Talk to me, baby girl, Derek said, his voice taking on the cajoling tone she'd come to dread. What's going on? Jasmine stared out at the water, summoning courage. I can't do this anymore, Uncle Derek. Can't do what? This. Us. Whatever this is. The words came out in a rush. It's not right. It's not normal. I want it to stop. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. After everything I've done for you? After all the ways I've shown you I love you? This isn't love, Jasmine whispered. Love doesn't feel like this. You don't know what love is, Derek snapped, his facade beginning to crack. You're 16 years old. What we have is real. It's pure. It's wrong. Jasmine's voice cracked as she turned to face him. I know it's wrong, and I know you know it too. I'm going to tell Grandma Rosa. I'm going to tell everyone. The transformation in Derek's face was instantaneous and terrifying. The gentle, loving uncle disappeared, replaced by someone Jasmine had never seen before. His eyes went cold. No, he said simply. You're not. Yes, I am. I'm done keeping your secrets. Derek reached for her then, his large hands gripping her shoulders with force that made her gasp. You think they'll understand? You think Rosa will thank you for destroying our family? Jasmine tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go of me. I've given you everything, Derek continued, his voice rising. I've loved you when nobody else would. And this is how you repay me. That wasn't love. Jasmine shouted back, tears streaming down her face. Derek's hands moved from her shoulders to her throat, and suddenly Jasmine couldn't breathe. The lake, the truck, Derek's face, everything began to blur. She clawed at his hands, tried to scream, but no sound came out. I'm sorry, Derek whispered, and for a moment, his voice sounded like the uncle she'd once trusted. I'm so sorry, baby girl, but I can't let you ruin everything. Jasmine's vision began to darken. Her struggles grew weaker as consciousness slipped away. The last thing she remembered was the sound of Derek saying her name over and over like a prayer. When Derek finally released his grip, Jasmine's body went limp. He sat there for a long time, cradling her against his chest, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He'd never meant for it to go this far. But now she was gone, and there was no taking it back. Derek wrapped Jasmine's body in a tarp from the back of his truck, weighing it down with cinder blocks. The lake was deep in the center. As he lowered her into the dark water, Derek whispered apologies that felt hollow even to his own ears. When he returned home that night, Derek called Rosa, his voice shaking as he told her that Jasmine had asked him to drop her off at a friend's house. She'd seemed upset about something, he said, but she'd hugged him before getting out and told him she loved him. Rosa was worried, but Derek assured her that teenagers sometimes needed space. For 3 weeks, the community searched for Jasmine Williams. Volunteers combed through woods and fields, posted flyers in every store window, and held candlelight vigils. Derek was there for all of it, helping coordinate search efforts and comforting Rosa. She's a good girl, he told reporters. She just needs to know that we're all here waiting for her. But Jasmine wasn't coming home, and deep down, Rosa knew it. A mother's intuition, that bone-deep certainty that something terrible had happened to her granddaughter. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. A group of kids, skipping school to go fishing at the lake, noticed something unusual floating near the shore. At first, they thought it was debris, but as they got closer, one of them noticed what looked like fabric, and underneath, something that made their blood run cold. The police were called immediately. When they pulled the weighted torp from the lake, they found Jasmine's body. The medical examiner would later determine that she'd been strangled. Derek was questioned as the last person to see Jasmine alive. But his story was consistent, his demeanor appropriately grief-stricken, and he had no obvious motive. The police looked at other possibilities: a stranger abduction, a boyfriend Rosa didn't know about. But then they found the journal. Rosa had been going through Jasmine's belongings when she discovered the notebook hidden beneath the mattress. At first, she'd thought it was schoolwork. But as she began to read, Rosa's world collapsed. The entries detailed months of abuse, manipulation, and psychological torture. They painted a picture of a vulnerable teenager being systematically groomed and exploited by the one person who was supposed to protect her. They revealed Derek not as the caring Uncle Rosa had always believed him to be, but as a predator. Rosa's hands shook as she read her granddaughter's words, each entry more heartbreaking than the last. Jasmine had been suffering in silence, carrying the weight of Derek's secrets while slowly being destroyed by them. With trembling fingers, Rosa called the police. The journal entries provided the motive investigators had been looking for, but they needed more than the words of a dead girl. They obtained warrants to search Derek's house and truck, looking for any physical evidence that might corroborate Jasmine's account. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. Hidden in Derek's bedroom closet, behind a false panel, was a collection of photographs and videos that documented the systematic abuse of his niece. Some were clearly taken without Jasmine's knowledge. Others showed her in various states of undress, looking uncomfortable and far younger than her 16 years. The most damning evidence was found on Derek's computer. Despite his attempts to delete the files, forensic investigators recovered thousands of images and videos, along with chat logs that revealed the extent of his manipulation and control. Among the recovered files was a video taken just days before Jasmine's disappearance. In it, she looked directly into the camera and said, "If something happens to me, if I disappear or if they say I ran away, don't believe it. Uncle Derek isn't who everyone thinks he is. He's been hurting me." The video had never been sent. Derek had found it on her phone and deleted it. But in his arrogance, he'd kept a copy for himself. Derek was arrested on a Tuesday morning while getting ready for work. The police found him in his kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. He didn't resist arrest, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't even seem surprised. As they led him away in handcuffs, his neighbors watched in stunned silence. This was Derek Thompson, the man who helped elderly neighbors, who volunteered at the community center, who sang in the church choir. How could he be capable of something so monstrous? The trial began 6 months later. The evidence was overwhelming, the motive clear, and Derek's guilt undeniable. His defense attorney tried to argue that the relationship had been consensual, that Jasmine had been a willing participant. But the prosecution, led by District Attorney Sharon Hayes, systematically dismantled that argument. They brought in expert witnesses who explained the psychology of grooming, the power dynamics inherent in adult-child relationships, and the impossibility of genuine consent when one party holds all the power. They presented Jasmine's journal entries, which clearly showed her confusion, fear, and desperate desire to escape. Rosa testified, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She talked about the granddaughter she tried so hard to protect, about the trust she'd placed in her brother that had ultimately cost Jasmine her life. She looked directly at Derek as she spoke. "You didn't just kill Jasmine, she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent courtroom. You killed the trust between us. You killed the safety she should have felt in our home. You killed the future she should have had. Denise also testified, not in Derek's defense, but for the prosecution. Through tears and barely controlled rage, she talked about seeing her daughter change over the months before her death, about the signs she'd noticed but failed to interpret correctly. I trusted him, Denise whispered. We all trusted him. He used that trust to destroy the most precious thing in our lives. The defense had little to work with. Derek had confessed to the killing, though he maintained that the relationship had been consensual and that Jasmine's death had been accidental. But the evidence told a different story. The weights used to sink Jasmine's body, the tarp she'd been wrapped in, the remote location. None of it suggested an accidental death. Expert witnesses testified about the physical evidence found on Jasmine's body, evidence that supported the theory that she'd been strangled deliberately. The medical examiner explained that the injuries were consistent with manual strangulation, requiring sustained pressure that would have taken several minutes to complete. As the trial progressed, more victims came forward. Women who'd known Derek began sharing their own experiences of inappropriate behavior, unwanted advances, and boundary violations. The pattern was clear. Derek Thompson was a predator who had spent years perfecting his ability to identify and exploit vulnerable targets. But none of his other victims had been as vulnerable as Jasmine, and none had paid as high a price. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, sexual abuse of a minor, and production of child pornography. As the foreman read the verdict, Derek showed no emotion, staring straight ahead. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. District Attorney Hayes asked for the death penalty, arguing that Derek's crimes were so heinous, his betrayal of trust so complete, that life in prison wasn't sufficient. The defense asked for life without parole. Judge Robert Martinez listened to both sides before delivering his sentence. He spoke directly to Derek, his voice filled with disgust. You were trusted with the care and protection of a child, Judge Martinez said. Instead, you exploited that trust for your own gratification. You stole Jasmine Williams' innocence, her sense of safety, and ultimately her life. You robbed her family of their daughter and granddaughter, and you robbed this community of a bright young woman who had so much to offer the world. Derek was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The courtroom erupted in applause and sobs. Rosa sat in the front row, clutching a photo of Jasmine to her chest, tears of relief and grief streaming down her face. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow. No sentence could bring back her granddaughter. Derek was transferred to death row at the state penitentiary. But even that small measure of justice would be denied to Jasmine's family. 3 months after his sentencing, Derek was found dead in his cell. He'd used bed sheets to hang himself, leaving behind a note that offered no apology, no explanation, no closure. In his final words, he continued to maintain that what had happened between him and Jasmine had been love. Even in death, Derek refused to acknowledge the truth. Rosa felt cheated by Derek's suicide. She'd wanted him to live with the consequences of his actions, to spend decades thinking about what he'd stolen. His death felt like a final act of selfishness. But as months passed, Rosa began to find peace. The trial had brought Jasmine's story to light, had given voice to a young woman who'd been silenced by fear. The evidence had made it impossible for anyone to deny what had happened or to blame Jasmine. More importantly, Jasmine's story sparked conversations about recognizing the signs of abuse, about believing children when they try to speak up, and about the responsibility adults have to protect vulnerable members of their communities. Schools began implementing new programs. Churches started training volunteers to recognize grooming behaviors. Rosa established a foundation in Jasmine's memory, dedicated to supporting young victims of sexual abuse. She spoke at conferences and schools, sharing her granddaughter's story and urging adults to trust their instincts. "Jasmine tried to tell us," Rosa would say, "maybe not with words, but with her behavior, her withdrawal, her fear. We had chances to save her, but we missed them because we trusted the wrong person." The foundation also worked to change laws around mandatory reporting. Jasmine's Law, as it came to be known, passed in 17 states and became a model for federal legislation. Jasmine Williams would have turned 18 the year Derek was sentenced to death. She should have been graduating from high school, preparing for college, falling in love with someone who respected her boundaries. Instead, she became a symbol, a reminder of what happens when trust is betrayed and silence protects predators. But in becoming that symbol, Jasmine's story achieved something Derek's manipulation never could. It gave her a voice that reached beyond the grave, touching the lives of countless other young people who needed to know they weren't alone, they weren't to blame, and they deserved to be protected. Derek Thompson got exactly what he deserved, not just death, but the complete destruction of the carefully constructed image he'd spent decades building. His name became synonymous with betrayal and abuse. His memory serves as a warning rather than a legacy. And his death ensured that he would be remembered not as the helpful uncle he'd pretended to be, but as the predator he really was. Justice wasn't just served in Derek's case. It was delivered with the full weight of a community's rage and a family's love. Jasmine Williams may have lost her life to his manipulation and violence, but she won something far more important. She exposed the truth, protected other children from sharing her fate, and ensured that her abuser would never hurt anyone else ever again. Her story reminds us that sometimes the people who seem the most trustworthy are the ones hiding the darkest secrets, and that speaking up, even when it's difficult, can be the difference between life and death for someone we love. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of believing victims and protecting the vulnerable members of our communities, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share these difficult stories not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims and hopefully prevent future ones. Your engagement helps us continue this important work, and every share could potentially save a life. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to speak up when something doesn't feel right. Sometimes, your voice might be the only thing standing between a predator and their next victim.